Gaslight, gatekeep, girl boss, goddess. In case you guys didn't know, that's like, you know, Pokemon and how there's like evolutions. That's kind of how it goes for girls. But they miss Queen. Queen's in there somewhere.
In the timeless words of Beyonce, girls, they run the world. And in the lands of the elves and Warhammer fantasy, no truer words have ever been spoken. Getting down to the nitty-gritty of things, you can more or less pin the entirety of the Dark Elves and everything they've ever done on Morathi. She's the one who refounded the pleasure cults, leading to many high elves sliding into decadence, and when her son Malekith was dealing with them, she convinced him to join their side using methods not suited for discussion within the first minute of a YouTube video. And more to the point for this video, the Everqueen of the High Elves. There's a lot of lore that goes back and forth a bit on who the real powerhouse of Ulthuan is between the Phoenix King and the Everqueen. The Phoenix King usually makes most of the laws and stuff that govern the High Elves, for instance. But the Everqueen can certainly play politics when needed, and also keeps the spiritual health of Ulthuan safe. And in a fantasy setting, that is kind of important to do.
I do think it's cool that there's like a little division of power like that.
There's straight up a ritual they gotta do to keep the moon from crashing into the planet. That's important, and depending on how you read it, you can argue that the Phoenix King really just exists to make Babi with the Everqueen, so the next one can exist, and then they both just go their separate ways to do whatever. No one said they have to love each other after all, they can go do their own thing after the fact. And then we get Everqueens like today's subject, Alarielle. Gaslight, gatekeep, girl boss incarnate. She's beauty, she's grace, and she's gonna get me called woke on Twitter with this video. But that's
What? I heard that right, correct?
She's beauty, she's grace, and she's gonna get me called woke on Twitter with this video. But that's okay, because if that's the price I pay to talk about elves, then so be it. Sit down and listen about Alarielle the Radiant, a My Little Pony character who got lost in the gritty world of Warhammer fantasy. But let's look at that word first.
It does sound like a My Little Pony
Everqueen.
Character name.
It's got ever in the name. You know what else has ever as part of the word? Forever. And you know what's good for forever? Knowledge. Like the knowledge you can get from Brilliant, the sponsor of this video.
Pank.
Brilliant is where you go to learn data science, math, computer science, and so much more with interactive lessons that are actually fun to go through. You want to sit through a math class in school? Of course you don't. No one does. The person who wants to do that doesn't exist. But on Brilliant, that sort of thing is engaging. You aren't going to be falling asleep at your computer. You'll actually be interested in learning, because Brilliant knows that learning and fun can go hand in hand. They're hands-on lessons that teach you how to solve problems, not just memorize them. And it's all totally stress-free, because there's no time crunch or obligation to study 40 hours a week like it's your job. Got 5 minutes on the train? Load up Brilliant. That's more than fine. Got 40 hours a week? Well, that's just fantastic. If you got the time, then Brilliant's going to make sure you learn your best. Not sure where to start? Well, if so, might I recommend exploring data visually? It's always handy to have some skills with handling data. You can make useful data out of damn near anything, so getting a start on learning it properly can only help. True. And if all that isn't enough to convince you, how about
learning how to read graphs, statistics, and that sort of thing is like, it cannot be understated. Some people don't know how to read graphs, and they don't know what information is being presented to them. It's crazy.
This. Using my link in the description and pinned comment, you can get yourself 20% off your annual plan with Brilliant. Even better, the first 30 days are a completely free trial. That's https://brilliant.org/pancreasnowork/ for both of the above offers. Learning more is never a bad thing, so sign up for Brilliant today and keep your brain in tip-top shape. Now then, time to beeline it for the Sword of Cain. Alarielle the Radiant's backstory is both that of someone destined for greatness by birth, and also that of someone who was so far out of their depth you can't help but feel bad for them. As with all Everqueens, she was the child of the previous one, an elf named Estriel. When her mother finally died, she would receive the composite soul of the previous Everqueens as well as Isha's power, becoming the next in a long line of Everqueens to help safeguard Ulthuan. As a little chibi elf, she was taken away from her mother and grew up in secrecy, as is tradition for the Everqueens. Her mother during this time was tragically assassinated by Dark Elves, and aside from the obvious problem of her mother being murdered, in elf years she was like 15 years old tops. But now she had to get the power of a goddess far before she was ready to take it on, as well as co-rulership over the entire continent of Ulthuan. Sink or swim is a pretty good way to describe Alarielle's early life. But wait, we're not done yet. That Dark Elf assassination wasn't just a funny little isolated prank they were pulling out of boredom. Malekith was beginning yet another invasion of Ulthuan. He was determined to get his birthright that wasn't actually his birthright, but Mommy Dearest was putting the thought into his head while he was putting his penis in her, so he was determined to get his way. Almost immediately after being crowned Everqueen, Alarielle had to deal with the largest Dark Elf invasion of Ulthuan ever attempted, which was assisted by the forces of Chaos getting in on the fun as Dark Elf allies. And this invasion was not going well for the High Elves in the early stages. Dark Elves on their own are already brutal warriors, and now they were being assisted by Chaos warriors and demons. In fact, her coronation for all intents and purposes had its ending marked by a Dark Elf army interrupting it to come and take out the next Everqueen before she could come into her own. Alarielle is many things, but at this point she's not much of a warrior, so despite her maiden guard throwing themselves into battle, it looked like Alarielle was not to be long for the world. Thankfully for her and the narrative, however, Tyrion was here as well. And Tyrion is the heir of an Aryan and an all-around kick-ass fighter. He grabbed Alarielle, grabbed his sword, and stabbed any Dark Elf who got in their way. A Witch Elf stabbed him with a poisoned blade, but Tyrion powered through and escaped with Alarielle, Dark Elves and demons hot on their trail. Everyone in Ulthuan, however, assumed that the pair was dead. This was worse than just being the morale sinker of having your leader assassinated too, because of how the Everqueen is responsible for the High Elves' spiritual health. If she's missing or dead, the High Elves are physically weakened. Elf magic nonsense, sure, but it's what they have to deal with. So everyone thinking she's dead means everyone has a sad so big it degrades their combat effect.
Oh dang, so they placeboed themselves into making it worse.
Everyone, that is, except for our favorite magical twink, Teclis. Him and Tyrion being elf twins mean they have some sort of psychic link or whatever, and Teclis knew his brother wasn't dead because of it. And if Tyrion isn't dead, that means Alarielle probably isn't either. So with his newly forged sword and new magical crown, he dragged his tuberculosis-ridden ass over to where Alarielle and a now suffering from the poison Tyrion were about to bite the bullet by way of the Keeper of Secrets Nakari. And then Nakari exploded, because before the end times there wasn't a problem alive that Teclis couldn't solve by blasting it to Kingdom Come with magic. Alarielle and Tyrion got healed up, Alarielle gave Teclis his magical staff Lilith, and then the trio went on to Finneval Plain, where the final desperate stand of the High Elves was taking place. The upside of that magical Everqueen elf nonsense is now that they saw their Everqueen returned and healthy, the High Elves present had a fire lit in their hearts and fought like men possessed. Better than men possessed in all honesty, because there were Chaos warriors here and they ripped those guys apart like paper mache. With Alarielle present, the Maiden Guard once more formed up alongside the rest of the High Elf elite, and the Dark Elves and chaotic forces were sent packing. Although even in her video, I'm still gonna play favorites a little bit here. Teclis did most of the heavy lifting. He made Malekith so afraid of him, the Witch King threw himself into the realm of chaos to escape, and every Dark Elf that got near him was obliterated. Though in all fairness, without Alarielle's presence, none of the elves fighting would have been at their A-game. Just by virtue of her being safe and sound, let alone fighting next to them, is that much of a morale booster and force multiplier. And at some point around this time, Tyrion showed her his Sword of Cain, and they made Aliathra. We'll come back to her later. Now I might as well double dip a bit, since a video about Alarielle is going to be about the Everqueen position in general. So here's a bit of the responsibilities an Everqueen has, and you can assume Alarielle tends to all of them. There was that whole business with keeping the moon from crashing into the world, gotta do that every 10 years. She has to go all the way to the Tower of the Sun located near Inn, so this isn't exactly a small little trip. Once a year, she also has to go into the mountains around Ulthuan known as the Anuli to keep Slaanesh demons out of the dreams of the High Elves. The Everqueen is also in charge of elf fertility rituals, which is important because elves do not frequently have children and are an overall dying race. Shinzo Abe would be proud, I'm sure.
Yes, Shinzo Abe, yes. Yes. You gotta do it for Shinzo.
The fertility is beyond just the elves, though. Remember, the goddess soul bits inside of Alarielle are that of Isha, the goddess of fertility and life. The health of Ulthuan's food supply is also one of her responsibilities, so if you enjoy food, you better hope Alarielle is on top of things. But it gets even more extreme than that, because her very mood can determine the weather, especially in the home province of the Everqueen called Averlorn. When she's in a good mood, it's a wonderful spring day and the land is filled with singing elves and dancing bards and all sorts of that lovey-dovey nonsense. When she's in a bad mood, it's a scorching summer day in the Sahara, or a nice and sunny Kisleviite winter for all the poor High Elves. It is in the interest of the High Elves to keep Alarielle happy, if only so their home doesn't go through every climate disaster all at once.
I mean,
the Everqueen's court of Averlorn is also the closest thing to paradise in the Warhammer world, including the afterlife. And I wasn't joking about it being filled with the songs of carefree elves and bards. When they aren't being called to war as the High Elves tend to be, this is the Garden of Eden. There's friendly and mischievous nature spirits, and the elves almost just all live in mobile tent cities, and there's a general vibe of a never-ending party. Not a fall of the Eldar grade party, though. These elves are just having a good time. Now, of course, there's also all kinds of scheming and politics going on, because these are still the High Elves. Depending on the fellas in question, complimenting someone's poem about how beautiful the landscape is can also be a veiled insult on how Alarielle actually hates their guts. It really is a nice place, though, and for all that it is hippie paradise, the politics that happen here are just as important as those in Lothern with the Phoenix King. And very worth noting is that Alarielle the Radiant, in spite of being the Everqueen with all the domestic responsibilities that entails, is a playable model on the tabletop. She is not the kind of elf to just stick to her fertility duties and tend to Ulthuan's spiritual health. She's ready to get out there and take names at a moment's notice. Case in point, one time there was a Slaanesh invasion on Ulthuan. Morathi was involved naturally, and Alarielle was put in a coma through an otherwise failed assassination attempt. When she came back to the waking world, it was actually the first time the power of the Everqueen within her truly awoke as well. Alarielle, not being one to mess around, summoned an army of dryads and went into the heart of the battle. The Slaanesh champion leading the invasion sought her out for a variety of reasons, both tactical and Slaaneshi, but before he could so much as try and lay a finger on her, she just grabbed his hand. In an instant, no more Slaanesh corruption. She saved the man's soul just like that. Of course, Slaanesh is rather
she is like the opposite of Morathi. She can make me worse, and then it's like, no, I can heal you. Beautiful, beautiful. As women should be. I'll heal you. I'll make you better.
Territorial about her toys, so she started pouring her power into the dude while Alarielle was as well, and they got into a bit of a tug of war over the guy's soul. Eventually, Alarielle pulled out and the dude's soulless body turned into a massive chaos spawn, but I think that's more or less completely irrelevant. Irrelevant to showcasing her power anyways. They was still pretty relevant to the battle and they had to kill it. Alarielle went toe-to-toe with Slaanesh in a magical tug of
poor guy, but he did, you know, he knew who he was siding with.
War. Not a greater demon of Slaanesh, or the winds of magic, which were corrupted by Slaanesh. She fought Slaanesh one-on-one and got what she wanted out of it. Also worth noting is that even though Alarielle really wanted to kill him, she refused to, because if she could restore life rather than take it, she'll do that every time.
I mean,
Isn't that
makes
cheerful
sense.
And noble? The various elves of
love
Ulthuan
that.
are rather divided on how to feel about Alarielle going on the warpath as often as she does. For those against it, part of it is that she's going against tradition, and the Phoenix King is supposed to be the one handling the war, and going against tradition is so uncultured that it gives the elves physical pain, yada yada yada. But on rather more reasonable notes, some of them fear that it's a sign Isha is growing more warlike as time goes on. And you know what? Fair complaint. If I saw the embodiment of my mother goddess who's all about love and happiness and nature rip a dude in half, I would probably also be concerned about the future.
Yes.
And worst of all is that if the Everqueen is slain, reality starts breaking down a bit. Ulthuan basically just pulls from the mystery box for what the weather is going to be like, so that's a nightmare to deal with. All non-Druchii elves enter a state of intense grief, even the Wood Elves. It's so extreme that even people like humans who have been influenced by the High Elves feel an inexplicable sense of sadness. So again, given all of that, I sorta get why you wouldn't want her on the battlefield. If she dies, you're instantly depressed on the spot, and a tornado is ripping through the area.
Like, what happens if she dies and she doesn't have a, you know, a daughter? Because obviously she was, very young when she became the Everqueen. So I wonder what happens when there's no daughter.
There's also the fact she oftentimes seems to be going against what Finnabar has set in motion, but that's less significant and something that happens with every Everqueen at some point. The High Elves are all about duality, so if anything, the Everqueen and Phoenix King not being in perfect sync is what they want. For all they complain about her though, when Alarielle takes to the battlefield, it's a massive boost to the High Elves overall, so those directly around her at least won't complain in earshot. She's their queen and goddess, and no, for once that isn't just me being a simp for pointy ears, it's very literal here. And while she is a lore of life wizard, being Isha's representative and all, she's a lore of life wizard that can cause a forest to pop up out of nowhere and swallow your entire army whole. She keeps her troops healthy and energized, she can cause the enemy army to be devoured by nature, and since she's part Isha, Dryads and Treekin just love her and help her out whenever they can. As far as she's concerned, this is all her duty, and since her career as Everqueen began with her mother being assassinated and her nearly being assassinated twice, she's not one to shy away from combat. Plus, against chaos or the undead, she can more or less just snap her fingers and make the problem go away. If keeping Ulthuan's spiritual health means she's gotta crack some skulls, she'll get right to it. And going back to that duality thing the Asur love, Alarielle being the warmonger, while Finnabar is certainly the more diplomatic one, does fit with that worldview. Eventually, Alarielle had her daughter named Aliathra. Supposedly her and Finnabar's kid, she was actually her and Tyrion's kid, like I said earlier. For the purposes of Aliathra becoming the next Everqueen, there was no issues there. It does mean that the future Everqueen would eventually have the Curse of Anarion, though, so that would be a little bit awkward. Aliathra was a pretty cool gal, though. She was a great diplomat, in part by virtue of just how unflinchingly positive and cheery she was. Even the dwarfs loved her. She was the kind of elf that would give their weary race new hope for the future, in spite of all the tragedy and conflict the Asur had been through up to this point. Have I put up enough death flags yet? I'm worried that—
Yeah, I wondered. Not Pyrrha. Should have known. Pyrrhic victory and such.
there's a few people who either don't know Aliathra's role in the end times or are missing my nice and subtle hints. So anyways, as the end times begin, Manfred does his best to try and star in an episode of To Catch a Predator and kidnaps Aliathra. Tyrion responds to this by being himself and setting out to murder everything in his way. Alarielle has a rather more diplomatic approach. She goes to Athel Loren, and in exchange for trying to heal Ariel and the rotting Oak of Ages, they'd send a military force to help rescue Aliathra. Hey, diplomatic route doesn't necessarily mean the peaceful one. War is diplomacy. At one point, this turns into—
Yes, if those of you who have not watched me play Total War, I was not using the diplomacy tab. I was playing with Lore Master of Sotek, and all he told me is, says, hey, use your diplomacy tab. If there is anything that shows up green, you want to do it. And I was like, okay, cool. But I changed my color so it was yellow, so it, matches my model and my armor. And as a result, it changed other parts of the interface so it was yellow. And because it was never green, I never clicked on it. So I never used diplomacy for the longest time. So yeah, there's no diplomacy, only war.
At one point, this turns into her absorbing Ariel, as well as the rest of Isha, into herself. She then takes a bit of a backseat for a while, during which time her daughter is unable to be rescued and becomes one of the sacrifices used to resurrect Nagash. Rest in peace, Aliathra. You were a positive, happy-go-lucky little chibi elf, so naturally your only possible fate was a horrible, horrible death. At least you went out like a badass by refusing to rise to Manfred's taunts and making him look petty and stupid. It was enough to even impress Arkan. Eventually, Alarielle returns home to find out that Malekith is apparently the rightful Phoenix King now, and there's a whole lot of people not too happy with that. She marries him in order to keep some semblance of peace and unity, which, while stupid, is also probably the best of a whole lot of bad options. I imagine she was just trying to keep as much unity amongst all the elves now as possible, given that chaos was invading and Nagash had just come back. This does make Tyrion go nuts, though. His lover married his worst enemy, his daughter is dead, his friend Finnabar is dead, and it turns out his brother was the one to arrange quite a good portion of all of this in order to stop chaos. I can't blame him for being a little bit upsetty spaghetti. He drew the Sword of Cain and starts slaughtering elves left and right. Alarielle takes on Marathi, who in her madness thought Tyrion was her boy toy Anarion reborn, and at one point she just starts turning elves into trees. Tyrion is eventually dealt with, Teclis tries to bind the winds of magic to all the elves around him, Marathi mucks it up, and he can only bind light to his staff, life to Alarielle, and shadow to Malekith. Ulthuan then sinks, and all the elves have to learn how to get along in Athel Loren. Nagash shows up, offers Manfred on a silver platter, and everyone accepts. Alarielle and Tyrion especially, because Manfred sort of got their daughter killed to resurrect him. Naturally, Nagash taunts Alarielle and Tyrion over this, because he is just awful, but they keep their cool. Alarielle more than Tyrion. Tyrion wasn't exactly happy, but he was willing to suck it up given the circumstances. Speaking of, though, Alarielle was pretty much the only elf willing to talk to Tyrion at this point, given his stunt with the Sword of Cain. During this time, Be'lakor wandered in and doomed the planned backup world, and as revenge, they used Alarielle's little ruby in her tiara to trap him. He eventually got free because he's doing stuff in AOS, but hey, it was good going for a bit. It came time for one final effort to save the world, and blah blah blah, Manfred stabs Gelt, ritual fails, world's consumed by chaos, and everyone dies. At least Alarielle got to have a somewhat peaceful end, all things considered. Her and Tyrion held hands while chaos consumed the world. It was nice. When she returned—
Unprotected hand-holding? Unacceptable.
In Age of Sigmar, she was the goddess of the realm of life, Gyrin. Sigmar found her hibernating like a leafy bear and woke her up, since it was already like 1 in the afternoon and they had things to do. She was grateful enough towards Sigmar and joined his pantheon, and together they helped form civilization in the mortal realms, as all the gods in the Age of Myth did. Although sadly, Alarielle wasn't quite the same as before. The end times, the era between the two settings, and waking up alone had pretty badly traumatized her, and she would rarely spend time with her fellow deities. As far as I know, for instance, there's no indication that her and Tyrion have any sort of bond any longer. She wasn't even involved in helping get elf souls out of Slaanesh, and for God's sake, even Malekith and Marathi were helping with that. Instead, she planted soul pods. Old souls from fantasy, new souls from AOS, souls she found lying in a dumpster somewhere. All over Gyrin, she planted these soul pods, giving birth to the Sylvaneth. There were also a number of normal elves who came to live under Alarielle's protection, and all was good for a while. She even had another kid in a weird wood elf tree lady kind of way. Now make sure to pay real close attention to the mechanics of this in case it ever comes up in your own life. The way a life goddess reproduces is to cut off her hand, plant it in the ground, and eventually out pops a happy-go-lucky tree girl called the Lady of Vines. She was filled with all the cheer and energy Alarielle had lost, and she reminds me of Aliathra. So yeah, she fucking dies when Nurgle decides Alarielle is going in the jar like Isha did in 40K. Alarielle's down another daughter now, big rip. Then, as Nurgle is taking over Gyrin to make it all gross and icky, she dies. Most of the elves living with the Sylvaneth also fled for their own safety, so now they were down a leader and all of their friends. The Sigmarines, who had just recently taken reality by storm, replanted her own soul pod, and when she reawoke, she was properly ready to get back in the game. She realized retreating back into only protect Gyrin, A, wasn't sustainable, and B, was the same abandonment stunt the elves pulled on her. She ultimately forgave those new elves, although many of the Sylvaneth haven't, remade the Lady of Vines, replaced her hand with one made out of living wood, and then marched straight into the mostly Khorne-controlled realm of fire. And Khorne's forces, in spite of putting up a good fight, were getting crushed. In spite of Khornates liking axes, they're a bit less effective on trees that move and beat you to death. Alarielle, for her part, was the wrath of nature given humanoid form, crushing and blasting foes all across the battlefield. The battle ended with Alarielle and the Sylvaneth, much like Sigmar and his Stormcast, pushing back the forces of chaos and beginning a campaign to not only secure Gyrin, but the rest of the mortal realms. Oh, and she also brought back Draika. You know, Draika, the insane dryad lady that hindered the forces of order during the end times at every possible opportunity. Desperate times and all that, I guess. As time has gone on in the Age of Sigmar, she's made multiple appearances of varying levels of impact.
I like her
Relatively
giant
early
beetle.
on in the setting's history, she brokered peace between her Sylvaneth children and the cities of Sigmar's city of Greywater Fastness. It's a 19th century industrialist wet dream, which unfortunately means it's a nightmare of factory pollution. She was able to get them to somewhat limit their polluting in exchange for the Sylvaneth not wiping them off the map, although conflict does occasionally break out still. In Broken Realms, she opened the realm gates to the 8 points to allow a joint Stormcast and Daughters of Cain assault. Very interestingly, she only did it when Marathi asked her to and refused Sigmar at first, because apparently the Daughters of Cain had been staunch allies with the Sylvaneth for some time.
That seems like an odd mashup. I wouldn't have pegged that there.
I guess her and Marathi don't quite hate each other as much anymore, which is new.
Yeah,
at some point she planted
weird.
a seed that was the positive aspects of the old elf god Kurnos to be her consort, renamed Kurnoth. The negative aspects of him are in a place called the Weld, slowly gathering worshippers and gaining power all on its own. She is aware and trying to deal with this, but there's a lot on her plate, so it isn't going too well. As an aside, she's now cucked Tyrion in 2 settings. When Nagash was doing his third kill everything ever ritual, she told Teclis not to worry about it too much at first, since life and her own power was soon to overtake that of Death and Nagash. Teclis was understandably not willing to wait for whatever mystic BS she was on about to happen, so she gave him a hand. And after Teclis blew apart Nagash, she performed her own ritual to cleanse the death energy from reality and replace it with life energy. It worked with a resounding success, finally putting an end to the Necroquake. Unfortunately, it worked too well and freed the ancient god of destruction Kragnos from his prison. She's done rather little in the way of preventing any resulting catastrophes from this, but she is preoccupied with corrupted seed Sigmar hidden Gyrin that Nurgle's forces are using, so fair's fair, I guess. She made a rain shower cleanse the city of Nurgle corruption, and has overall been a real force for good in the mortal realms ever since her reemergence as a true warrior goddess. As always, let's wrap up with Duberdon Alarielle for Age of Sigmar. For lore positives, she's both a goddess, queen, and factional leader. Same as she was in fantasy, to be honest. So fights with her aren't just going to be grand-scale encounters with the largest of armies. You've got your faction leader throwing down and showing that she isn't no slouch. Having a playable deity on the field of battle is always spectacular, and Alarielle is no exception. She's also a returning character from fantasy, so with her you get to follow a character whose story has been going strong for decades. That being said, in personality she's pretty different from who she once was, and the Mortal Realms have turned her into a unique character in AOS rather than just Alarielle ported over from fantasy. Not that I'd have much in the ways of issue with that, but it is cool to see her change with the setting. She's definitely for you if you want your army to be firmly in the good aligned side of things. The Sylvaneth do sometimes go all Athel Loren on outsiders and kill them for being in the wrong part of town, but Alarielle for her part doesn't do much of that. Ever since her second rebirth, she's been happy to work with outsiders as needs dictate. For internal faction relations, she's a mother to all the Sylvaneth. They adore her and follow her every wish. If she says they're going to be the good guys and play nice with Sigmar's lot, then that's what they'll do. She in turn does everything she possibly can to keep them safe. Despite everything, she's still a caring individual who will keep her children safe to the best of her ability. Alarielle takes to the battlefield because her children and the forces of order need her to, which is very heroic. And most prominently for the lore positives I see, she's a goddess who can well and truly fight back. Yes, she died. Yes, she went through some mental anguish that's caused some problems, but in fantasy she went toe-to-toe with Sinesh and held her own, and she's only gotten stronger since. So if you want to show what the power of a god can really do, she's perfect for it. Only surpassed by Nagash, of course, for such is his power. For tabletop positives, her basic stat line is 16 HP, a 14-inch move, 5 control, and a 3-up save. She's pretty tanky all things considered, especially with her Life Bloom ability that gives her the potential to heal 2d3 wounds with no strings attached. She can do that in any hero phase too, which makes it all the more versatile a healing ability. You can pretty safely put Alarielle in some tricky situations knowing she'll probably be just fine. She's also a good caster, being able to cast 3 spells. Her Metamorphosis spell lets her deal some decent damage, and if you kill the enemy with it, you can place a free tree. The Sylvaneth love their goddamn trees, so this is a good spell. Her healing ability can also be used to instead give her +1 to her casting rolls, so if she's either not taking too many wounds or it's early in the battle, she can be a proper magical menace. She can bring the pain just fine in more mundane combat too. Her ranged attack isn't anything too special, but it can get an early snipe in on a bigger character you might be using Alarielle to deal with. Her spear in melee has 5 attacks with 3s to hit and wound, rend 2, and deals 2 damage.
Wait, is Wardroth the name of her beetle? I love that. I think that's the name of her beetle.
Her beetle, and by the way she rides a big beetle now, only hits on a 4-up, but it wounds on a 2-up, has 6 attacks until she takes pretty big damage, and has rend 2 and deals 4 damage. She's gonna put the hurt on people that get close to her, and with a total of 11 attacks in melee, she's solid at taking on both characters and tougher troops. With her living battering ram ability, she can also be brutal on the charge if you roll a high charge roll and roll the needed 3-up on it. She does give some army support too, mainly in her healing. In your movement phase, you can pick a destroyed Sylvaneth unit and on a roll of 4-up, bring it back at half strength. If you choose a monster, it takes an auto 8 damage, but it's still back. Necromancy is a lot funnier when it's trees, and you can do just that with her. And last tabletop positive, sweet god, her model is beautiful.
It is.
It's gorgeously designed, wonderfully implemented, and it is just phenomenal all around. It's aged fantastically for a model as relatively old as this one, and it does so much justice to her. And yes, tall, pretty lady. I prefer my elves to be twinks and goths, but I firmly respect the person who declared Alarielle needed thighs that could crush
I was just about to say she got some big thighs there. I was like, dang, she's a little thick.
To be twinks and goths, but I firmly respect the person who declared Alarielle needed thighs that could crush an entire field of watermelons. Good taste, whoever you are. For lore downsides, it's kind of a shame that the Everqueen plotline is just dead. That whole thing with their child becoming the next one is really cool, but it looks like it died with Aliathra. I don't believe there's been any mention of it, which is made more annoying by the fact she's still called Alarielle the Everqueen. And as is usual with these godly characters, you don't get the more low-key approach with any army she's a part of. This is the goddess of life. She's not got the time to be taking on a random group of a couple beastmen. She's only coming out for the real battles, so if you like lower stakes narratives for your game, maybe sub her out for someone else. You're also fielding a character who strikes me as being high risk for not learning her lessons. Like, she lived through the end times. She saw how it was only the combined efforts of everyone, man, elf, dwarf, and more, that could have saved the world. She was there at Middenheim when the ritual was being cast. She knows that if it wasn't for one asshole betraying them, she'd still have her home world. And yet during the Age of Chaos, she still left Sigmar's pantheon along with everyone else to focus on her own realm, and suffered for it. And I don't want to be rude, partially because I'm not entirely sure I missed a lore blurb somewhere, but she seems to have done it again. When she cast her own big ritual to counter Nagash's, she freed Kragnos. And yet I'm almost positive she hasn't done anything about it. Come on, Alarielle, you really gotta learn to play nice with everyone else properly. This isn't too big of a con, and I'm a pointy-eared fanatic, so I'm not gonna hold it too much against her, but it really doesn't look good on anyone involved when Nagash is the last person to betray someone, and that includes Alarielle here. That does actually remind me of one last combined pro and con. Life is a good counter to death, so if Nagash drives you to rage, having Alarielle in your army is a great way to give the Bone Pope the finger. The opposite side of that coin is having a character in your army and faction that the entire Grand Alliance of Death would probably happily see slaughtered. And chaos. And destruction, most likely. You know, as much as I said that Alarielle is happy to get along with other people now, maybe don't pick her if you want true, actual friends in other factions. They might end up getting cucked like poor Tyrion. For tabletop cons, it's gonna be a pretty short list, because by all means, she appears to be damn good. At 680 points, losing her early on or at a crucial moment is gonna kick your army square in the sack, especially if you're relying on her resurrection abilities to pull some shenanigans with. At smaller point games, she's either not fitting in the army, or you're not going to have much of an army left to fit her in. She's also not quite enough of a beatstick to keep up with the heaviest hitters. Archaon is going to give her some pain, and while in lore her ritual ass-blasted Nagash is out of existence, on the tabletop her spellcasting doesn't hold a candle to his. Speaking of, in fact, I don't think she has any insta-kill protection unless I'm missing something. I hope you pick the correct hand if you're facing Nagash down, because otherwise you just had a third of your entire army flushed down the drain with Hand of Dust. This next one is purely a personal taste thing, but I just don't care for the Sylvaneth lore. I don't care about the trees. I do not have wood for the trees. Sure, it's fitting for her lore, but I can't be bothered. So despite being a good wizard, I just find the spells she can cast pretty mediocre. I'm sure there's someone who's gonna hate me for saying that, but I can't bring myself to like the Sylvaneth spell lore no matter how hard I try. Teclis and Nagash have spoiled me on this, I will fully admit. And there we have it. Alarielle the Everqueen. Gaslight Chaos and Dark Elves, Gatekeep Dark Elves out of Ulthuan and Nurgle out of Ghyran, and Girlboss the High Elves and Sylvaneth around to kill people she doesn't like. Oh, I guess there's one final tip. Not gonna do a full do or don't with this one, but if you're not playing as her in Total Warhammer, be very afraid of her. The peace-loving epitome of life and mercy gets no greater joy than beelining it for the Sword of Cain and using it to make a Narian look like a weakling. She isn't Alarielle the Radiant in Total Warhammer. She's Alarielle Whitestrake, because Nagaroth is going to look like a crater before long if she has her way. Or she'll single-handedly kill Archaon, because she can just decide she's doing that now. Thank you to writer of Rohan / Orange of Drings for this lovely art piece, by the way. Sorry for butchering the ad. It's gameplay accurate. And as always, thank you to my wonderful channel members.
Yay!
You are the life man. Hey you, person who stuck around. You get a bonus lore positive for hanging out till the end. Yay. By using Alarielle, you can rub it into the face of Eldar fans that they have the writers that despise elves. The Eldar have their life goddess stuck in Nurgle's garden, and the Asur / Sylvaneth have theirs regularly taking to the field to destroy anything that threatens them. Isn't it nice to be into fantasy in AOS? Isn't it nice when everyone gets to have fun?
Good video, good video. I like me my elves.